Bubba sat rocking in his chair, looking out over the still water. It took 2 days for a breeze to show up and finally clear the smoke smell out. He raised a bottle to his mouth, taking a long sip. The fire had weakened several of the larger branches way up, and a group of ladies broke them off. He had spent that day coordinating the downing to minimize splash against the house. Now, the dying foliage gave perch to the numerous males as they fished with line and hook. He turned, hearing a sound behind him. One of the twins came out around the doorframe, hugging the wall. Bubba raised his bottle up toward him. "How is she, bud?" It looked around with its back 2 eyes, noting the orb floating nearby. "She's awake, hurting." Bubba nodded. "Which one are you?" "Benny, sir," it said, bowing to the man. "Be careful around her. She can get violent coming down." It listened to the translation for a moment and then darkened his eyes. "She is violent now. Our father is getting her the medicine. Puss is pretty attentive to her." He laughed, looking back at all the males hard at work on the water. "All of you are..." Bubba sighed, finishing the bottle, and stood up. "Guess I better get back to it as well." He threw the bottle out into the water, not turning to hear it splash. Bubba walked along the porch and stopped next to his motorboat. He stared down into it, noting Alexandra's dried blood on the bench. Movement caught his periphery, and he looked up into the tree at the side of the house. A large female was crouched in a knock, covered in mud and leaves, staring at him. He waved at her. "What do you want?" The female rose taller, mud and leaves flaking as she did. "You see me?" "Of course I see you. You're right there." Bubba shook his head and climbed into the boat. "What stupid shit Dahlia have you doing now?" The female climbed out on the branch leading toward the roof and stopped over him. "She is teaching us." Bubba looked up at her. "She's a nerd." "Nerd?" The female managed the human word. "Yeah, she's book smart, not swamp smart." He looked down, checking the engine. "Don't let her mess you all up. She'll get more of you killed." She climbed closer, leaning over him as he moved around the craft. "She knows many things we do not. Many insights." Yep, that's how books do. They offer insights." He looked up, pointing at her. "But not applications." He smiled. "Plans fall apart when the bullets start flying. Planning preys upon violent conflict." She repeated, the orb rendering back into his human speech. "Her camouflage idea didn't work on you. It would not work on other yous." He sighed and looked around. "Look, you coming or going?" "Coming or going where?" she asked. Bubba looked out over the water at all the males and pointed at a few of them. "Everyone's busy. My buddy's in there making a splint weave thingy for my woman. Everyone is out fishing, feeding their womenfolk with whatever is left around here." He started the engine, causing the boat to thrum. Ripples started jostling through the water. "I gotta do my bit around here. Take care of some of you all. Man duties, you know." She stared at him, one of her eyes trailing along the boat. "You are inviting me?" "No," he said with a chuckle. "I'm hiring you." "You offer me pay?" He nodded. "What nest you with?" "I am of the Wanderers." "And your name?" "Death Soon," she said, bowing slightly. Bubba nodded and waved her down. "Badass name. Come on if you want." She started threading herself down onto the boat and stopped before her feet touched. She focused on him. "What pay do you offer for my flesh?" Bubba's eyebrows raised up. "For your flesh?" "You put my flesh to work. What do you pay?" Bubba laughed. "Oh, well, you and yours get first cuts. You said Wanderers?" She widened her eyes and dropped flat onto the boat. "Yes, I accept your work." He nodded back and started motoring slowly. She looked around as the trees and house started moving away from them. Death Soon reached out, touching a large leaf as they went by the plant. "It feels weird." "Yeah, Puss freaks out still when we go out. His boys are taking to it, though. Maybe it's an age thing." Bubba's face calmed as he picked up speed, meandering his path out through the woods. After a while, he slowed back down and pointed over to the water, noting one of her eyes watching him. "Go on and wash that shit off yourself." She looked her body over and started rubbing the dirt chunks off. "Not in the boat," he shouted. causing her to flinch. "Wash it off!" She rose up, looking over into the water, her arm raised, hand held just above the surface. "Wash it off in there? You scared of the water, too?" He shook his head at her, sighing. "This is y'all's swamp. How are you all so terrified of everything out here?" Death soon raised her head, looking up toward the canopy. "That is our swamp." The orb translated for her. "Down here, this is danger." "Well, Death soon, with a name like that you should own danger." She stared at him. "How do you own danger? You females are fighters. If you're going to be killing folks, you better get over that fear shit." She focused all 4 eyes on him, widening them. "I am to die soon. Fear is what I have." Bubba's body went still as he stared back at her. "You're sick?" She slumped slightly. "No, my nest is. Our days are falling out." He shook his head. "I don't understand half of what all you guys do." He looked back out over the water and steered out from the tree channel. The boat moved out into a shallow grass pooling and he slowed it back down. "Sick or not, full bellies help." He pointed out towards a cluster of flowers sprouting up near a mud shoal. She chittered. "Full belly does help." She rose up, looking where he was pointing. "Wait, that is not good land." Her eyes pivoted back to the tree line. "Turn back. There is nowhere. This isn't safe." He pointed over at the hook line. "Dying soon? Get yourself together and hand me that." She reached over and grabbed the metal, feeling it in her hands. He nodded, hand outheld. "I'm going to hook it, shoot it, and you're going to help me reel it in. Keep focused. Stay in the boat. You understand? Focus, do not get out. And do what I say." She widened her eyes and stood taller. "I will obey." Bubba looked over at the flowers as the boat drifted closer. "All right, Death soon. We're about to get you some supper." Alexandra limped over to the greenhouse spigot, bending with a groan. She turned the handle with her good hand. The pump under the house activated and began sending water through the filtration system and out the end of the hose. She made her way over to the first bed, water trailing behind her, spillage finding its way to the drain in the floor. She spritzed over the strawberries and then aimed at the tomato plants. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw one of the spiders. "My stupid husband around?" The creature looked at her, its eyes pivoting around the large room. "You don't understand a fucking thing, do you?" She turned towards it, smiling. "My little Benny. Where's the others?" She winked at him. It walked over, inching closer to her. She took a long breath and knelt slightly. "Here, do what I'm doing," she said, handing the hose over to him. He took the hose in his upper right hand and started moving it back and forth. She watched as he sprayed in one spot for a moment. She pointed down at the soil and put her finger in. She met his eyes and shook her head. "You have to stop once it's soaked." She smiled again as she grabbed his hand, moving it to a drier patch. "Here, make it wet here." His eyes moved over her, the soil and the water. She stood up straighter, watching as he seemed to catch on. He soaked the asparagus bed and then moved over to the flowers. "You're doing good." She patted him and turned toward the door to the halls. "I'll be right back." She stepped into the cool of the house, smelling the air. Someone has some brewing. She had to lean into the walls several times before making it all the way down the hall to the kitchen. The walls seemed to move and she looked around. 7 of the spider folk were positioned on the walls and floor, staring at her. She raised her right hand up, nodding at them, and looked toward the brew station. Puzdot was standing there with a cup in his upper hands. She smiled at him, nodding. "Thank you, sir." She bowed slightly, taking the cup from him. "I gotta go turn off the spigot before he freaks out." She smelled the cup and turned back down the hall. She had hobbled halfway back to the greenhouse before the hairs on her neck stood up. She paused and turned around. 28 eyes were staring back at her. Alexandra shook slightly, the coffee shaking in the cup. "Holy fucking hell, you guys are creepy. Don't do that shit." They didn't understand her, but instinct had them bowing to her vibrations. She shook her head, waving her frail left hand in its wrap. "No, none of that nonsense." She turned back toward the door to the greenhouse, waving them with her. Come on, you nutters. She stepped back into the greenhouse, smiling. Benny looked up at her with two eyes. The garden beds were watered, and he was standing at the drain, water flowing down the pinholes. She took a sip of the hot coffee and then handed the cup to Puzdot. She took another step and turned the water off. Eyes watched as the flow ceased. She looked around, noting their interest, and then reached out toward Puzdot. He gave her coffee back, one eye watching her. She took it back and sipped again. She noticed his three eyes focused on the spigot. She laughed slightly and moved her chin toward it. Go on, try it. Puzdot turned it back on. The males near the door retreated slightly at the immediate flow of water out the end. Benny moved it around, but made sure the stream on the floor was flowing toward the drain. Puzdot looked at his fellows and explained something in his consonant-filled speech. Just like the kitchen sink, just more, she said as she made her way to the folding chair. Lights, boats, coffee makers, all that shit, and it's the water hose that impresses you. She chuckled, shaking her head. Stupid spiders. She watched them as they moved around the plants, sniffing and touching them. She was lost, listening to them and staring at the ceiling lights when the other twin stepped in, talking away. The males all looked at him, listening for a moment before all eyes turned toward her. Alexandra looked around and then turned toward the little one. What? He bowed, his eyes turning dark. Okay, what is it? Come on, boy. Tell me what it is. She sat her cup down and stood up gingerly. Fucking hell if Bubba is hurt. She looked around. No, you all would be more hectic. She took a step toward the twin, and it started out the door into the hall. Okay, not so fast. I'm coming. Bubba kept an eye on her as he was gutting the FNJ. She helped him when she saw an opportunity to hold something, but mostly sat on the edge watching him with all four eyes. He reached a tricky spot on the lower torso, trying to maneuver a chunk of the armored carapace off. She reached over with both upper hands and squeezed the shell. It cracked under the pressure and split open. Bubba looked up at her, nodding with a smile. Thank you. He then began cutting again, flaying out the threads and colorful organs. You know, I have no idea what most of this stuff in here is. He pointed at an organ near one of the arms. I think that's hell, I have no idea. Lymph, maybe? Death soon listened to the translation and then darkened her eyes as she moved around it. I do not understand. He leaned back, looking at her. Anatomy. Your folk know much about it? She pivoted an eye at him and then looked into the open beast. Dahlia has said your word. It does not translate. She showed us body parts like you're doing. She pointed into the chest cavity. She said food is here. He laughed. I've been wondering about that. You all have no asses. Where's your shit come out at? She focused on him and pointed at her mouth. Waste. You shit out your mouth? She continued staring at him for a moment. Is there another way? I do not understand. He laughed and looked back at the Fenga. Y'all's bodies are similar in that. I've been curious about it. Gutted a bunch of stuff and just figured it was weird alien biology. He reached in, cutting more threads. I didn't give much thought to stuff, you know. She widened her eyes, leaning over the carcass. I did not think much either, not until Dahlia. Thinking was the mother's job. Well, guess that is one good thing Dahlia is doing. She turned an eye onto him. You have said several things disliking her. He nodded, pulling a bluish ball out from the center mass. Yeah, she's different. Don't like it. Your house is stronger. Does she have favor with Alexandra? Bubba looked over at her, pausing for a moment. No. He laughed. She bought favor with me, I guess. She has your favor, yet you openly talk bad about her. She does the same. Humans are odd. He shook his head, chuckling more. She talks bad about me? Not you specifically, humans in general. His eyebrows raised up. Oh, really? Like what? She says confusing things. Does not understand her own people. I understand little of either of you. She was born not of human but of intelligence, and she is owned. It made no sense, but we felt her agitation. You guys feel a lot of things, don't you? She looked him over and straightened her body. Dahlia says we feel as humans see. Humans smell like we see, but our common area is hearing. Bubba thought for a moment. What did she mean by saying she's owned? He looked back down at Fanga. Or did you not understand much on that? Death soon reached over, pulling the meat out of a freed-up limb. She has an owner, one who made her but not human. She says she was made to clean, learn to study, making a collection of life. It is confusing, but that is what she said to the mothers. Bubba laughed. Knew it. A fucking neo-preserver mate even. He shook his head and looked over at the pile of fresh meat. Well, we got a good haul. This should fill a few bellies. You talk as confusing as she does. She looked over the meat. Yes, this has been good day. Your magics are worth the dealings. Bubba stood up, balancing in the center of the boat. He looked back and forth at the meat and her. You don't know, do the Fenga talk? No, they are quiet until they snap you down. Bubba laughed and made his way to the driving control. All right, hold on. Let's head back. He took his seat and fired up the motor. Within a moment, they were picking up speed, leaving the marsh toward open water. The small male pushed the front door open, and Alexandra followed him out onto the porch. She paused in the doorway as she found herself staring at 7 large females, each wearing a rectangle hanging under their heads. She raised her right hand up in a motionless wave. Hey. Mother Darkness stood directly in front of her. We need to know. Alexandra looked around. At the periphery of the porch, dozens of other hands were gripping the edge of the tin roof, eyes peeking under. Know what, exactly? Darkness looked around and refocused on the human female. You wish to act queen, uniting our tribes. We need to know if you like Dahlia. She chuckled dryly. That could mean a lot. I'm female if that's what you're intending. Mother Darkness shrank slightly. No, we are aware of your gender. We mean if you would turn against other humans to help us. Alexandra shook her head for a moment. What? What is Dahlia doing? She looked around. What the fuck? She looked past them, out over the water, and shouted, Dahlia, the fuck you doing? You out there? A figure rose up on a far branch. Here! Dahlia shouted back, waving with a bow in hand. Alexandra met Darkness's eyes. I like you all. I'll start there. She reached over at the twin on her right side. These fellows have taken good care of me, helped me out lots. I think your people deserve far more respect than what my people have given you so far. I, Alexandra, promise to do what I can to help you. But will you assist us against your own people? Darkness asked again. Alexandra looked out over the water at Dahlia. Fuck it. Yeah, sure. If the moment arises, I will fight with you. You're my neighbors, and this is my home. I'll fight with you if it comes to it. The mothers stood taller, eyes wandering amongst themselves. Darkness reached down and strummed her fingers on the porch. The xenoarchs all around Alexandra began rocking back and forth as they felt the strumming. Alexandra watched for a moment. So, we all good? Dahlia had made her way closer and stopped just in view from the porch awning. We need to petition the Senate, she shouted, cupping her mouth. I told them we're going to petition for them. Alexandra laughed. Fight Congress? She looked around. You want me to fight Congress for you? She took a step toward the edge of the porch, easing past the mothers to look up at Dahlia. You told them we're going to go to Congress for them? Dahlia smirked down at her as she neared the tin roof. Well, I told them I would, because I can. She grabbed an anchor line and lowered herself down next to 5 smaller females. Might be harder for a convict to get off-world. Alexandra glared at her and paused. A familiar noise echoed over the water. Bubba's boat was getting close to the open water near the house. Eyes turned as the boat entered the clearing. Bubba waved and his eyes widened as he saw all the spiders covering his roof. He slowed the motor down as he approached the porch. He saw Poozdot waiting with a rope and motioned for him to toss it. He walked to the bow and took it, pulling himself up to the side. Alexandra walked over and stared down at him. Well, good thing you planned for company. Bubba looked over at the flayed Fenga and then up at Death soon. Get your cuts and get the rest cooking. She widened her eyes and looked around at the other xenoarchs. A dozen females made their way down the posts and started helping her. A mother walked up next to Alexandra, her eyes split over the boat. I thought she had fallen to the water. Bubba looked up at her and back toward Death Soon. Nah, she was safe with me. Good help, that one. Mother of Wanderers reached out, touching Death Soon's hand. I am happy feeling you, daughter. Death Soon bowed. I made an agreement with the Bubba. We are fed well today. The two pulled each other closer and locked hands. Death Soon leaned in and touched her head to her mother's leg on the porch. Bubba climbed up and stood next to Alexandra, leaning into her. How you feelin'? Like shit, but that ain't half of it. Them? He said, looking over her. She nodded, squeezing him with her right arm. Yeah, Dahlia is talking them into petitioning. He looked down the porch as Dahlia made her way down the corner post. Yeah, Dahlia seems to talk a lot, he said, raising his voice. The researcher looked around, noting all the four-eyed faces, and then settled on Bubba. Yeah, it's a thing I do. I get excited, overshare. That's something the preserver put in you? He asked. She paused, taking a deep breath before shrugging. I don't know the full extent, but yeah, maybe. Alexandra looked at her. Manufactured? Dahlia nodded. Not by choice, but yeah. Bubba shook his head. Yeah, I don't know about you being around here. Alexandra elbowed him with her good arm. Your racism is showing, Bubba. She ain't human. Alexandra stepped away from him and looked around at the spiders. And? Is that something bad? He shut his eyes for a moment. She ain't pure. Shouldn't be acting like she's been. Alexandra laughed and looked at Dahlia. Yeah, see why he's here, right? Dahlia raised a hand up. Nah, I get it. Alexandra shook her head. No. She looked at Bubba. Apologize, you shitbrain. He stared at his wife for a moment. No, I'm sorry, but no. We're human, she ain't. We earned our place and she has hers. Alexandra glared at him. Just 'cause we were raised on that planet doesn't mean anything. It's a shithole. You know it. Everyone knows it. She reached up, pointing at him. Hundreds of eyes watched them. You hate those purists just as much as they hate people like her. Quit embracing that ideology. That ideology rules the stars, he said, pointing back at her. Like it or not, that's how things work. She is what she is, and she should be hiding it better if she wants to keep acting like how she does. Alexandra shook her head as she gritted her teeth. You're better than this, Bubba. He shut his eyes, forcing his fists down. Doesn't matter if I am. True is true. She's fake. We're born real. People in town don't know, do they? He asked, looking over towards Dahlia. She laughed. Those shit brain swamp tards? Hell no, why would I tell them? I didn't even tell you. He moved his palm through the air. See? You see how she is? Alexandra looked over at her. Dahlia, we got some things we need to work out. She looked around at the mothers. We humans need to talk some things over in private. She pointed toward the front door. If you all would excuse us for a bit, please eat up while you wait. Dahlia made her way to the door and looked over at Bubba. Come on, Bubba. Let's go in and talk. Bubba groaned and started walking, his eyes on Alexandra. She's manufactured. Alexandra watched him and noted Dahlia already inside. I know, she mouthed. Bubba frowned and went in, holding the door for her. Get in here, woman. He shut it behind her. The mothers tapped amongst themselves on the porch, each sharing their thoughts on the conversation. The rest of the tribes listened, everyone trying to make sense of it.